But we're talking about what Nigel Farage has suggested, which is a renegotiation of the Good Friday Agreement. Are you glad to hear that, first of all? Welcome, Jim.
Well, I've mercifully heard very little of this discussion, but from what I have heard, I detect a core of hypocrisy from those who are now lamenting any threat to the Belfast Agreement, many of whom were the very cheerleaders for tearing the very heart out of the Belfast Agreement when it came to cross-community consent, so that the protocol could be continued. The hypocrisy of that, the stench of that is indescribable, and it really falls very ill from such people to now think that to pretend that the Belfast Agreement is sacrosanct.
I'm happy to take that on the chin.
It is
happy to take it on the chin.
It has been ripped to shreds by the cheerleaders because they saw that in that action they were helping to dismantle the union. And of course, that's what the protocol was all about. But in terms of Nigel Farage's proposal, I very firmly support the disavowing of the European Convention of Human Rights. I utterly repudiate the suggestion that if you do that, you shred the Belfast Agreement. I take you back to what was Article 2, and what is Article 2 of the British-Irish Agreement of 1998, of which the Belfast Agreement is an appendix. And it says very clearly that the solemn commitment to support the Belfast Agreement is where it is appropriate. Now, how could it ever be appropriate to create one part of the United Kingdom with different rights so that you create a migrant magnet in that part of the United Kingdom while the rest is freed from that burden? So it could never be appropriate to have one part of the United Kingdom constitutionally exercising different rights from another. And that is why it is right and necessary to extricate the whole of the United Kingdom as a whole from the ECHR. And it is nonsense to say that you can't do that because the Belfast Agreement is so sacrosanct. So the Belfast Agreement is reflected in 3 sections of the Northern Ireland Act, Section 6, Section 24 and Schedule 2. Parliament, a legislative of that Parliament can equally amend and remove those. It's all about taking back control of rights. So they're not controlled by foreign judges, they're controlled by the sovereign Parliament and government. And
I take your point, that is a legal interpretation which explores what sovereignty of Parliament actually means in the United Kingdom's constitution. This agreement, the Good Friday Agreement that we shorthanded, the Belfast Agreement, is actually a legal treaty, of course, between 2 governments, the Irish and British government. How do you think in practice, politically now, a renegotiation could be brought about?
Well, I think if the focus is on solving the migration problem, then that is going to put the focus on the ECHR. And I think that it's relatively straightforward to extricate the whole United Kingdom from the ECHR. Under Article 58 of the ECHR, a government gives notice that they are leaving. They give notice for 6 months, and in that period, the United Kingdom, a new Parliament, if Farage had the majority, it could legislate for that. It would also legislate simultaneously for a new British Bill of Rights, which would apply to all legal residents in the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, and the sum total of rights, therefore, would be equal across the UK and would not be diminished, contrary to the crazy propaganda of people like Sean Woodward and others. And
a follow-up question from me, Jim, please, and I'll let the others come in as well, but what about the political parties in Northern Ireland? Are they relevant to this conversation? Does the UK government at Westminster simply impose some future without a European Convention of Human Rights on the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, we joined the European Convention of Human Rights as a nation. If we're leaving it, we should leave it as a nation, just as we should have in respect of the EU. It is, these rights are national issues. That's why I've always thought it would be folly to have a local Northern Ireland Bill of Rights. The rights, if you're a United Kingdom, then you must have the same rights, whether you live in Devon or Down. And that seems to me a pretty fundamental principle. Focus on the common law. We had rights before we ever had the European Convention of Human Rights.
Of course.
And would still continue to have. So the common law and
if your ideas were to become reality, it is still possible you'd still have the Good Friday Agreement, right? Even though you have a British Bill of Rights rather than a European Convention or a Human Rights Act.
You would have such as survives in the Belfast Agreement. I've already made the point at the beginning that it was truncated and the heart ripped out of it by the abrogation of the cross-community.
Fundamental foundation of equality and human rights underpinning the conflict and as part of a really important solution to the conflict,
I'm sorry,
supported by the parallelism of the rights.
I'm sorry, Brona wasn't so exercised when it came to removing the fundamental operative of the Belfast Agreement, namely cross-community consent and the protocol. She had nothing to say then. She was quite happy then to tear up the Belfast Agreement. But all these left-wing anti-unionist forces are delighted to use whatever facility exists, if that involves breaking the Belfast Agreement, to advance the cause. But when it comes to an issue such as this, they kick up dust where there shouldn't be an issue. Because it's quite clear what you'd replace it with is a British Bill of Rights.
Got it, Jim. Thank you very much.
Maybe the name sticks in their throat, but if they care about rights, then it should be the quality, not the name.